So there's like...
Oh, this is like a real...
I think it like went in the yearbook too.
Stop.
Yep.
That's crazy. How are you?
I'm good.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. Yeah.
You should be feeling really good.
Good.
I was like going through all of your data. I was like, they did so well. We actually don't need, because I printed out a lot of it, so we don't really need, yeah.
Okay.
And so I wanted to start with this. So we'll just kind of go in order. But your kids overall did so well.
Awesome.
I don't have the final average for Penn State, because I was waiting for the last pieces of writing in there, but I think it's going to be higher than.
It is higher. The overall average is 71% for all 3 classes.
Nice.
And then, I'm not sure, I wasn't able to pull this class by class data.
I'll show you how to pull those,
Okay, great.
which is really fun. But I think there's a lot of things to celebrate. So I put here just like the lessons and the like how each question was aligned.
Yeah.
And it was super, super aligned. Like the mid-unit was really a measure of what you had taught in classes. But there's a lot of things to be really proud of, like your Part B questions. This is absolutely amazing, like 90%, 100% in Virginia Tech.
And like I have no idea though, like how, for some of them, why like the percentage for B is higher than A. Like I think they can realize like, oh, this is the quotation that's important, but then like not getting A right.
Fascinating. Yeah, so usually it's the opposite. So that shows that like your kids really know like the significance of quotes, but maybe like what that inference means or what that shows might be different. Yeah, but you've got a lot to celebrate here, especially with 7.6/7.3. So just like take a second and you don't have to write it down, but like what led to the success in this, like your overall class mastery, but also on these specific standards.
So it's like 7.6 is really just assessed by question 3A. Okay, I see. And then 7.1 was assessed by a bunch of questions. Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's really exciting.
Yeah. So what do you think, like what led to that success? Because that is like you, and like none of this is coincidence. So like what in your teaching in the past week and a half really pushed kids here?
I mean, I feel like with the exit tickets that I was writing, like for them, and then with like the directed questions that I was asking in class, particularly like during those read aloud days, like the targeted questioning, just keeping in mind the types of questions that were going to come up on the mid-unit. And so like they had seen and practiced a lot of questions that asked them to do these things, even though we didn't do a ton of like Part A, Part B questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add, like, you were really intentional about like your work with inferencing, like making inferences was like beautiful, and like your non-examples, your examples, like that also really like helped. And the day that you revised remember which exit ticket it was, you're like, this doesn't match to like what kids are doing, and I think those are all really intentional moves that like keep the curriculum, but like you're getting kids what they need. So congrats, this is like amazing.
Yeah,
I sent a screenshot of it to Connor. I was like, look at Katie's data. So very exciting stuff.
It's really exciting.
And then so today I wanted to dive into the 2-point response, because that question was all throughout the unit. And so if you just take a second, I put the progression of standard 3, but if you just want to look at the sweet spot for 7th grade, and think about, to show mastery, what do students need to know, like in general, their knowledge, and then what do they need to be able to do to show mastery. Right, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think just sort of like the lowest level of like Bloom's, like just knowing like what setting is, like knowing what plot is, like understanding other story qualities, and then like just understanding the basics of the books that we're reading. And I think that like starting the reading journals soon, like with their IR books, like will also help build towards this.
And
really
like
heavily.
keep that, yeah.
And then they need to be able to like identify, not only define setting in general, but like in our text specifically, identify setting, plot, characters, etc. And then it sort of seems like seeing the connection, like as we move like from A to B, like in a plot, like 6.3 like unfolds in a series of episodes, like that's just moving forward, whereas like the word interact in 7.3 suggests like I said like see the A to B connection and then like move backwards, like see how it unfolds and then say like, oh, B happened because A happened, like moving backwards in their thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to pick out, like that interact word really implies that like how one impacts the other, and then looking at where it heads in 8th grade, it's like how one line of dialogue reveals aspects of blank, blank, or blank. And so I think that your kids seem to have a really strong like foundation here in 6th grade, which is like 7th grade I feel like that's also helping to build that success, and just knowing where the standard is heading for your kids that are super high that need that like
and
push.
I think some of us are here already.
I've
or,
seen
like,
that too.
Can definitely get there soon.
Yeah, especially with that mastery of this question, like how a line of dialogue is like significant. Like they really are pushing here, which is exciting. And that means that like you can move kids higher, faster. Yeah. And then so let's dive into the prompt. I know we've looked at this prompt many, many times, but just like what were your acceptable answers to this prompt? Like what would have been an acceptable claim? And just if you want to jot 3 or 4.
There's so many too.
Yeah, there are many. So what would you have accepted? Okay, I know there's a lot of, because that's also like a multi-part question, so what are some of the ones you wrote?
Yeah, I think for claim, like looking for experience generally, I think they actually did a decent job realizing like, oh, when I see the word experience, I can talk about culture, time, or place, or culture, time, and place, or like any combination. So thinking about those things in general, like, oh, Salva's experience as a survivor, Salva's experience leaving his home, Salva's experience traveling, Salva's experience going hungry, like all of those things. And then like for the second part, I have like makes him a blank person, like hitting a character trait, or makes him feel blank, hitting like an emotion. And then like the third piece that you need is a piece of evidence that supports that.
Yeah. And like because there were so many ways kids could have gone with this, I think that we'll really like see that in the writing, and I know you've already graded them, so I'm sure that you saw like some of the ways that kids thought. I was like, oh my, that was
That's
beautiful.
really interesting.
Yeah, and they were like beautiful. Yeah. So if you want to flip, we'll just quickly look. I wanted to, before we looked at the teacher exemplar, just like realizing why this type of prompt is also so important. On ANET 1, they'll have this like claim-based writing. This is the short answer, 2-point response. So like, how did these girls convince others? And so just knowing that like this is coming as well. And then ANET 2, the full essay, is this exact same type of prompt. Similarities and differences in like this perspective. Yeah, this one's coming. And then Park, we know, loves these types of like point of view influence prompts. And so knowing that this is something that kids definitely, like this is really important work that we're doing. And that theoretically kids should be able to really do this prompt really well on ANET 1.
This is this is 7.1, right? Like, this is like what happened.
It is like what happened, but I think the actual standard would be 7.3, like how the girls impacted the trials,
Okay.
but embedded within it.
Yeah.
It does sound more like explain a part of the text, but it is hitting at this standard.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe knowing that this is coming, like planning in a reteach about like strong claims.
Yeah.
This is something that I talked about with the other 7th grade teachers when we met on Tuesday, whatever day that was.
Yeah, like one central claim. Yeah. Okay. And then if you want to flip again and just, I know you've read the exemplar a lot, but just skim back over the teacher exemplar, and then we'll start looking at the high student work and what they were able to do. So we want to take 2 minutes and just reskim this, and then whenever you're ready, start diving through. And when we look at the high student work, thinking about like what were kids able to do, like what made it strong. Do you need more time? Okay. What are your overall, like, what could kids really do in the high student work?
I actually think, like, their inferences are some of the strongest points here. Like, they're definitely able to make the connection of, like, this is what it means about them as a person, or, like, this is what they feel. And, like, I was really pushing that, so it's good to see that they can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think their quotations are relevant, which is good. I think the pushes I would have here are, like, stronger claims, and then teaching, like, how and where to use context. like setting up
Yeah.
the quotations, because I think the quotations are good. It's just like I feel like often they like give the quotation and then give the context to the quotation,
Mhm.
and in a really good 2-point response it would be the other way.
Analysis first almost.
Or like even just thinking of context and analysis is like two different things.
Mhm.
Like I feel like ideally it should be context, like setting up the quotation, give the quotation, and then give your analysis.
Yeah. If you look at Autumn's, she's like, she does this pretty well. In the text, before he knew he was going to Ethiopia, he wasn't really sad or worried, he was just
Mhm.
curious. But then, like, she gives, like,
Yes.
yeah, like
Exactly.
hers is a beautiful example of that.
Mhm.
And originally I was like, oh, DeAndre has, like, this is the highest piece of work. And then I read hers and I was like, wow, like, she truly has
Mhm.
a deep understanding. But
Yeah.
I agree, like, their claims, for the most part, they all have a claim
Yeah.
that isn't just like factual, like it
Mhm.
answers the prompt, and you can clearly see like which aspect of the prompt
Yeah.
they were responding to. And Autumn's was beautiful because it had encompassed like all three.
Mhm.
And then, but even the ones that like his time influences or his culture, it's like very clear,
Yeah.
and like the paragraph isn't all over the place. It's
Mhm.
like, I'm going to talk about this, this aspect of his experience. And then let's look at, so just to stamp it, it was more concise claims, and what else?
I just think like stronger claims,
Okay.
like making your claim should relate to your entire paragraph.
Mhm.
Like I feel like some of them are actually writing like 2 paragraphs or something. Like Autumn should actually be 2 paragraphs because she starts a different claim later,
Mhm.
and like getting them to the point, thinking forward to essays of like you
That
have a
would be-
claim and then you have like sub claims. I forget what supporting claims is that we're calling them.
Yeah.
So like a stronger overarching claim, like better structure. So like context, quote, analysis.
Mhm. And I think the context thing will be, you could even push a small group of kids right now, but like
Mhm.
biggest leverage for everyone, we'll
Yeah.
see like trends as we go through medium and low.
Mhm.
But definitely context, like when you're doing reteach days, like you could get really creative with like who's getting what. Yeah. And then let's take about 3 minutes and go through the medium student work,
Okay.
knowing like what the high student work could do. What did you notice in the ones I pulled for the medium student work?
Okay.
Ready? Okay. What did you notice in the medium student work?
I feel like here the claims were a lot weaker, just like not specific enough, like by his emotions on his journey, like of course, like but what do you mean? Or just like the claim is like not incredibly relevant to the question, like it's not getting to what the question is actually asking. Like Najee's whole bit, like she did really well with like a quotation and then like drawing something out of it, but it's just not relevant.
Yeah.
And then like Genobe's, like she's pulling out like a physical feeling, which is not related to the question. So I just feel like these claims were like less relevant, which I feel like suggests that they maybe didn't understand what the question was really asking.
And the question is hard. Like the question has multi-parts, and so I think it was tricky in general. But like overall, there is a sense that like the claims aren't as clear here, and they're not actually answering the prompt. It's more of like holding on to like a detail about his journey versus like how that influenced his experience. Right. Yeah. Like the one, like he had to walk many miles without eating. Like had she, it impacts him by like attaching that to the character trait like we saw in the standard. Like that second piece is almost what they're missing in their claims. Yeah.
Oh, that's so frustrating.
Yeah. But it's a great, like seeing this, like you know exactly, like you're starting to see exactly where we should go with this. I just want to look now at just 4 pieces of the low student work and really do like asset based, like what could kids do, and then like what is the gap between the low and the medium.
Okay.
And so we'll just take like a minute and a half because these are shorter. What do you think?
Well, they can like pull quotations, and they can pull quotations that are relevant, and they know because I told them a million times, like, you have to have a quotation.
You have to.
So at least there's that. I think like Kamai is the only one who has a claim here, and like her claim is really weak, but that is an answer to the question.
It's like a yes, but
and then like her example is just like totally irrelevant, and like totally irrelevant even to her claim.
Yeah, and her explanation, her analysis sentence is
what?
Really, yeah, it was.
This is bizarre too, because she has been writing twos.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's super irritating. And then like Raja like doesn't have a claim. There's no claim there. Like he doesn't ever answer the question in his own words, even if you can see that he's like pushing towards. Like I feel like I could see what he is trying to do, or what point he's trying to prove. But there's just so little of his own writing in this sentence.
Yeah, it's not an original. But what can he, like even in Raja's, like what is there? Because there is something.
I mean, he correctly identifies that he's talking about culture.
Yeah.
And then like I can see where he's pushing in terms of like the second quotation too. Like culture is important, and like it makes Salva happy because he finds a friend who's like also from his culture.
Yeah.
And then Jalen, like he correctly identifies a character trait, and he tries to like paraphrase something. So I feel like he's still, all of them are still like going through the motions of a 2-point response. They know what it needs.
Yeah.
We're just not executing it super well.
Yeah. So there's evidence, just to name it, there's evidence of, like there's an attempt of a claim. They're attempting a claim. Each one also like took the prompt and kind of turned that into their sentence stem.
Right.
And each one has like attempts evidence. But it is that execution that's just like kind of the gap there.
Yeah.
And then looking at all 3, when thinking about your reteach, what would be like the highest leverage to push their writing before and I know they have more 2-point responses coming, but like also keeping this ANET prompt in mind, like
Right.
what is the biggest thing that's gonna push highest leverage to get them to answer this prompt for ANET 1?
I mean, I think like a claim related to like a 7.3 question.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. Like this, especially, I feel like the prompts in 7.3 make it confusing because there are inherently 2 things that they're
Mhm.
looking at, or
Yeah.
like 2 aspects. And so teaching kids how to make a claim that is one claim, but talks about 2 things.
Right.
Yeah.
Ugh.
It's hard, but like.
It's hard. I
but-
find it hard as a writer.
Yeah, and so I think that's a really, that's the place where I would go as well. And so before we flip to like reteach options, how would you want to reteach this? Like as a discourse or more of a model? So discourse would be like you're putting up a piece of work and you're having kids kind of navigate through. And that's when you have like 50 to 70% of kids showing mastery, or like they've got the bones of it there.
Right.
Or do you need to straight up model and show how to do that? Like where are you headed, and then I'll tell you what I thought.
Interesting.
And just with like this prompt. So not looking at like overall, but just with like this. What do you think would be the best way to reteach this?
I mean, looking at like the percentages breakdown for the question about 7.3, like it seems like only one of the classes is in that comfortable like 50 to 70%. And like do they, like that's 88. Like
That's
that's
strong. Yeah.
and that suggests almost, I feel like that it would be like more productive to pull a small group from that class, don't you think? Like
Yeah.
for 50 to 70% master the topic, and then for 88% of them to have gotten that question about that standard right, like maybe pulling a small group from Penn State to talk about
To model. And then discourse for the rest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or I don't know, like 38%, yikes. That would suggest doing a model.
Is that you?
right?
Is that you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that like
struggle.
and I pulled the class comparison because that alone, that 38 versus 88 is a massive difference.
Yeah.
And I know that it might initially be more work to plan to reteach lessons here, but that is like a very big difference.
Yeah.
I feel like if you did discourse for even Virginia Tech and Penn State, I think that would be a really beautiful discourse lesson using like Autumn's piece of writing. And then for Yale, just like model with your exemplar. Yeah.
I feel like part of it too is like they just like are super low energy in the morning.
Oh, that's your morning class. That's a small class too, right? Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I think that a model then, like showing those steps and then like, I did it, now you do it with like sentence stems will be really helpful for that group of kiddos.
Okay.
So if you flip the page, I just showed an example of like what the guided discourse could look like. And so if you just want to take a second and read through and then think about like how do you want to do your model for the one class, and then with the guided discourse, like how could you, this is just an example of how you could reteach this, and then we'll actually make like action step plans to make the reteach lesson. And so this is just like, I would, like how to like start the conversation, like launching kids of like this discourse between like who got the 2, who got the 1. Why is like forcing them to do the heavy lifting there, and then like stamping it and naming it. Like Autumn's was strong because it was like his feelings changed. Boom. It was like
That's
clear.
the answer.
That is the answer. And like
I feel like even just like highlighting this to them, like look how little space this takes up versus this.
and that's what I did here. Is
Yeah.
like just look like it's a claim is
Yeah.
one sentence, and it's clear and it makes one point.
Mhm.
Like her, like the feelings change, boom, versus like the influence of the point of view because he's going
and that's blah blah blah, and
Yeah.
he is like, how many
Yeah.
times is this person like, so many connecting words like because
yeah,
and
that is far away. Lots of like prepositional phrases like
you just
like,
need one.
get to the point. Yeah. And then the second thing would be, and this would kind of scoop up your middle kids.
Yeah.
Then the bottom one would scoop up like your lower to middle. And so like it's not just a random fact about the text. Like she came up with this. That's what an inference is.
Right.
Like it's extra. It wasn't just given in the text.
Mhm.
It's like something she
Right.
developed
and that
on
like
her own.
this is a fact.
It's
you
just
know?
a fact. Yeah.
And like maybe even like let's rewrite this claim so that
Mhm.
it's stronger, because I feel like even just like Salva's experience influences his point of view in chapter 5 because he is afraid that his family wouldn't be able to find him.
Yeah.
Like that's already a stronger claim.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because
Cut
this
it.
is the inference.
Yeah. And so you could do that. That could be your guided practice period. And then the independent practice would straight up be like, look at yours, look at Autumn's, rewrite, go. And like giving them those steps of like either you're deleting or
Mhm.
you're, so they get another at bat with this.
Right.
Or for the independent practice, you could also give a new prompt if you wanted to do
How
that.
do you do a fresh one?
A new prompt and kind of looking at where we're headed with ANET 1's 2-point response.
Yeah.
And model that kind of like, how did these girls convince other people that this event? Like how did people impact event is what this
Just
prompt
make up
reads.
like a totally parallel prompt for a long
A
one.
parallel, yep.
Mhm.
I think that would be very cool. So you could do either option there. It's totally up to you.
Would I need, when introducing a new prompt, like do you think I would need to model heavily if that's supposed to be their like IP for the
I would show them like this, look at how similar this prompt, or like this prompt is asking you to do the same thing. How does one thing impacting another, and like make that visual connection?
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately you want kids to be able to start to see that.
Yeah. So like how does one thing impact
Another.
another? Yeah, I should come up with like visuals for all of the statements that I can just
Like,
pop
boom,
them
boom, boom. Yeah.
into the PowerPoint.
And then the last thing I wanted to point out is that just with previous experience with this standard, usually the answer is this stem by blanking blank. So if you think about like any prompt, how did the event impact this? By blanking blank, by creating drama, by creating suspense, by revealing aspects of a character, by showing a conflict.
By changing his feelings.
And sure, hers was the best one that had that. And in the past, I've actually taught kids, like, the answer to the point of view prompts is by blanking blank. And if you don't have that, you don't have a claim.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's just some really helpful, like, ways for kids to see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think?
His day one will be in his math class and somebody want to pop in on
Yeah.
that math class.
And then so thoughts, next steps, like rolling this out. You could, and I honestly think because it's so broken down, you could still do this with your first class. You just might need to like model more during the like revision guided practice
Okay.
step.
I also think like there are kids in that class who would lots. That's the thing too, is like that 38% is like kind of surprising because there are like 15, 16 kids in that class. So that means like a very low number of children got this correct, which is kind of surprising. Like I can think of lots of kids who should have gotten this question
Higher.
right. And I'm wondering like what they picked instead. Because
We can do an item analysis of that as like a separate.
yeah, I was looking at it
Yeah.
yesterday and it was kind of hard to tell.
Okay. I love to look at like the trends and misconceptions, so we can definitely,
Yeah.
because I saw that too. All the rest of the classes, I mean, there weren't any major differences like that, but 38 versus 88 is really big.
And this is the question about Naya living by the big lake.
Mm-hmm.
And so like they were able to 46%. That's still low, but significantly higher. Like we're able to pull that it was like that the new air,
Mm-hmm.
that like it was dangerous.
The fear.
Yeah. But then I'm wondering in 2A, a lot of them picked B, I think, and D.
Yeah, and we can see, like, we can pull percentages of
Mhm.
kids that picked each one and then see, like, where the misconception
So many of them
was.
took it on paper in Yale as well.
Okay, and you had to enter.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's also interesting. Just as, like, a difference there.
Yeah.
Okay, so then next steps are, like, picking the day that you're going to do the reteach. And so looking at your pacing calendar, of where you want to reteach it. And then I pulled a resource, just like this was a reteach I did on a similar prompt, just as a reference of like what it could look like for kids. And like the misconception was like there's two different types of point of view. Like one, we mean the narrator, and two, like someone's opinion. And so it's like drawing that conclusion and then having practice with both. And then it's a text set. This would be more for A2 when it comes, because this is this prompt. But just a text set with two different paired texts, and like how you walk kids through just like like this is the misconception, fix it here, 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 and here. Yeah. And just like as a resource for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And then let's pick a day for the reteach before I want to jump into something else. So you have because you're about to jump into all like informational texts
Mhm.
for a while.
Yeah, we're not touching the book again for quite some time.
It's like you go back 2 days before ANET. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the 6th.
The 6th.
Okay. And so I would just, one thing I've noticed in 8th grade ELA is when the nonfiction pairs, like sometimes they're a lot longer than the chapters, and the reteach day actually takes, it's hard to do the read aloud and the reteach because the text is so long.
I feel like these texts are not.
They're not, okay. Because the 8th grade ones were like super
Unless I'm
long.
misremembering.
It's excerpt 2.
So it's the second half. I think it's like a page. Let me
Okay,
pull
no,
it up.
that's good to hear.
But now I'm worried that I'm wrong.
Because Andrea, she had to split it over multiple days. Is it time?
It's time. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll plan on the 6th, and then I will send you this like model for reteach, but you are free to like, if you want to adapt or change anything to it, like by all means.
I think I will
So-
certainly use like that structure.
Okay,
and
cool.
my plan. Just make it into.
Yeah. And then we're gonna meet tomorrow.